So we set up our little hasty patrol base and we're waiting. And in the early part of the day, it's hot and we're dying. And Bashir's like, we need to go get these guys. And we're like, nah, man, we can't do it. And again, he's the only one that speaks English. He's like, no, we need to go do it. And he keeps pressing. And like, we can't figure out why. And he keeps pressing. Still can't. Like, Bashir, just calm down, man. And what it was is he didn't understand. He's like, he can see the boat too. We didn't say anything about it. He can hear the plane. And he's like, at one point, he's like, why don't you just drop a bomb on them? And we're like, one, we don't know exactly where they are. We have no way of geolocating them. Two, the battery died on their phone. They're not talking anymore. So we don't know if they moved. We don't know what's going on. We just know they're in those hills somewhere. Or like, three, like, we haven't worked a whole lot together. So like, this is a dangerous thing. Like, we just need to wait these guys out. Well, he loses patience. So it's probably 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he comes over to the three of us. So the Somalis are kind of spread around, just doing their thing, chewing cot. And the three of us are like, just trying to figure out like what's next. Because we can't just shoot naval gunfire. Like, we basically have to get in an engagement to do anything. And we're in a country we're not supposed to be in. We got no air assets, no CAS, no nothing. So Bashir walks over and he goes, I'm taking my guys and I'm going over the hill to kill them. And I go, what? And he goes, you can come with me if you want. Unless you're scared. He punked us. Literally punked us.
Holy shit.
And so I'm like, all right, Bashir, straight face. I'm like, I get it. I get it. Like, we need to do something. I understand. I go, can you give us a minute? Let us talk and come up with a little hasty plan here. And I'll be right back with you. He says, fine. So he walks off to his guys. And I turn around where he can't see me and I start laughing. And Phil and Brady are like, what are you laughing at? And I go, you guys aren't going to believe this. I was like, but when you go through Robin Sage in the Q course, you have a G chief, a guerrilla warlord guy that's pretending that's his thing, and he has his little Gs. And I go, and they act like complete assholes, and they do things like this. And when you're in the Q course, you're like, no way this ever happens. And here we are in Somalia, and this former warlord is going, are you too scared to come with me? And so, we had a quick conversation, and I'm like, look, we're going to lose the faith of these guys. These are our only security. We're a 5-hour flight, a really long swim to a boat. We got no assets, no nothing. Like, we can't lose this. Like, we need to keep these guys on our side. We didn't trust them to begin with. We hadn't worked with them a whole bunch, and it wasn't a very comfortable feeling. It wasn't like we had been training these guys and working with them for months on end.
Yeah.
Supposedly, the CIA had trained them for the last few years, but I can tell you what we saw was not a highly trained force. So anyway, we end up pulling Bashir in, and we explained to him that basically we're going to do a movement to contact, bounding Overwatch. And we ended up putting the gun teams on either side, not so much because of the tactics, but because we were afraid about having them too close to us.
Yeah.
And what would happen. So we had a gun team to our right flank, a gun team to our left flank. The three of us were staying together no matter what. And then we had a couple other Somalis and Bashir with us. And so we start this bounding Overwatch. We'd move a gun team up, move another gun team up, and so on and so on. And so we crest over the first hill. About the time we get over the first hill, headed up to the larger ridge, we hear a belt fed open up. And it's to the north of us. And they're shooting at the guys on our right flank. Can't tell exactly where it's coming from, but we can tell that that's the only ones that they can see. So we continue to move up to gain the high ground on this ridge line to try to get a better fix on their position. About the time we get up there, we realize where they are, not too far from our position. We engage those guys, but then all hell breaks loose. So in the draw behind the ridge that we're on, we're taking heavy fire. Ineffective, we're behind like this ridge of rocks. So we've got some cover, it's good cover, but man, they are just hammering the ridge line. So the impression is that this is exactly what we thought. This is a lot of guys. So we got a couple of dudes that have been dealt with on the north side, but they have shot and wounded both of the guys in our gun team to our right flank. About the time that we're trying to figure out exactly where they are below us. Now, we got no grenades. We've got nothing, like I said.
Shit.
Small arms. About that time, bullets come. I'm here, Phil and Bashir over there. The two Somalis are a little bit further to his left, and then the gun team is beyond them. And then Brady's on my right, and then the wounded gun team on his right. And so rounds come cracking right across the front of me, the cover I'm standing at, like skip off the rock right in front of me. And Brady and I both look left at the same time, and dudes are maneuvering up the ridge line. There's 4 or 5 guys that are coming up the ridge. And so all this in a split second. That first like barrage of fire, Bashir is like just standing out in the open, gets shot 3 times. So Phil grabs him, pulls him down behind cover, and is like packing like Kerlex and gauze in his holes. Brady and I both turn, and I move to a piece of cover between me and the guys on the left flank. Yell to Brady, hey, move to me, move to me, move to me. Suppress the fire. Brady moves to me. Now it's the 2 of us. The 2 Somalis that are up here with us are now cowering down behind the rocks and terrified, like not returning fire, not anything. And I think, well, at least they're not going to shoot us, right? They're there. The gun team between us and them are now in a shootout with the guys. So half the guys that are coming up the ridge are shooting at the 2 Somalis on our left flank. The other half of the guys are shooting at Brady and I. It's kind of whack-a-mole. Brady and I ended up shooting rounds between a bunch of rocks and just ricocheting a bunch of rounds into the dudes, and they would peel out to one side or the other, and we kind of dealt with it. But anyway, in the midst of that portion, we ended up dealing with all those guys, but they had wounded not just Bashir but the other 2 guys. So now I've got 5 wounded Somalis, including the only one that speaks English.
Shit.
And the 3 of us. So everybody on the ridge is down. I'm not worried about, it doesn't seem to be, we have good visibility that we've got any more threat coming up the ridge line above or below, but we're still getting hammered from down below. And I'm like, I don't know what our move is from here. Like the 3 of us were like, we don't have a lot of options here. And Brady goes, how about some naval gunfire? And so, the 3 of us kind of looked at each other and we're like, all right, yeah, we can do this. Like, let's just they're all in one spot. Let's hammer this draw. We had already talked to them, pre-planned targets. So the boat was ready and aware, and they were jacked up. Like, they didn't even know we were there.
I'll bet they were fucking pumped.
We called them in the blind. It was a really funny, 20-minute conversation before we had gotten into that position. And you could hear them in the background, like, yeah! Like, they knew they were getting ready to get some. And so Brady is on the horn with the boat. I have a handheld satellite radio because I'm like, we can't do this unless I call troops in contact over the SATCOM. Like, they got to know we've been engaged, that we didn't just shoot naval gunfire into a country we're not supposed to be into. And so, so Brady's talking to the boat, calling in naval gunfire. I'm calling in troops in contact over SATCOM. I said that we had wounded, but I didn't say who, because I was worried that if it was just Somalis, we weren't going to get the same reaction. There's no more fire coming from the hills other than, the smoke and everything that's left, dust from the naval barrage. We get in the patrol base. Phil basically, almost on his own, I think I helped him with the first 2 guys treating casualties, but Phil basically patched up all them dudes by himself. I was talking to Basaso. Basaso was talking to Djibouti. Djibouti was talking to Nairobi. Nairobi was talking to JSOC Bragg. JSOC Bragg was talking to SecDef in DC. There's no sounds, there's no fire, there's nothing coming out of the hills, and basically we don't have the ability to go over there at night. We've got no workforce anymore. We had 3 Somalis, I think, down in the village that had weapons, but they weren't really a part of what we were doing. So we had those 3 stay in the patrol base. We commandeered a couple of vehicles from town. We loaded up the wounded, and we drove the 10 minutes down the road to get to the dirt airfield. The bird left with the wounded to fly back to Djibouti, and then the 5 of us went back to the patrol base and basically just camped out for the night until the sun came up. We didn't tell anybody that there weren't any Americans on the plane, the wounded. So when it showed up in Djibouti, it was PJs with a bunch of wounded Somalis, and no one in Djibouti was even aware of the operation. So they ended up in the hospital there on the naval base in Djibouti, and all those guys ended up living, which is cool. But yeah, we kind of surprised them with that one. So the sun comes up the next morning. We ended up going over the hill as a more capable force, because now there were 6 of us. And we had 1 local that we had recruited out of town that spoke enough English that we could at least communicate with the Somalis that were with us. They weren't really willing to go over the hill again because they had witnessed what happened the day before. But they eventually and reluctantly came with us, and we thought at least they could help us with recovery of some of the bodies if it was 2 and 3 or whatever. yeah, no, they're Arabs and they weren't touching a body after that much time later. So we ended up moving through the area. A couple of guys dying. Most of them were already dead. We had a guy that we thought for sure was Harun Fazul. Looked just like him. I mean, same skin tone and had a pair of glasses. Like, it was a lot of similarities that we thought it was him. Nobody that looked like Nabhan. And the rest of the guys were like a who's who of bad guys from around the globe. Like 2 guys with British passports, like legit British passports.
No shit.
A Yemeni, a Syrian. Like, it was this random collection of, it was exactly what we thought it was. And so we're on the radio. We've got a possible for Harun Fazul, whatever his call sign was at the time. And they're like, all right, well, we're going to fly in an SSE team to do DNA testing and confirm. We need you to take them up to the site. And we're like, we're not doing that. And they're like, why wouldn't you do that? And I'm like, I'm not taking an FBI team that's never been to combat, never been trained, into the hills of northern Somalia where I don't know how many guys are still running around out here. Like, I had no way to confirm or deny if we'd gotten them all. I knew we had a bunch of bodies, but I had no way of knowing if we had gotten everybody. And so there's some back and forth on the radio. What we ended up agreeing on was we bagged up the guy that we thought was Harun Fazul, and we carried him off the mountain, threw him in the back of a truck, and then drove him down to the airfield. So when they landed, all they had to do was get off the plane and deal with the possible. And then we could give them all the other intel we collected, so passports and money and they had laptops and all kinds of stuff. Smorgasbord of intel. It was a decent hit in that respect. But yeah, so the FBI guys get off the plane. I unzip the body bag for them. They peel it back. It took them 2 seconds. They grabbed him. They rolled him up on his side. They pulled his shirt up, and he had no scar. And they said, it's not him. And we were like, what? And they're like, it's not him. I'm like, how do you know that fast that it's not him? You didn't do anything. And they go, yeah, Harun Fazul had appendicitis. He had his appendix taken out in whatever year. He's got no scar where his appendix was removed. We loaded up and flew back to Djibouti. There's a little bit of a reception there from the handful of people that did know where we were. We get to the hangar, and, all 3 of us are just covered in blood. Not our own, but I've got cuts all up and down my arms from the sharp corally rocks that we've been moving around on the ridgeline. And then, the wounded Somalis and all that stuff. A little Navy dude comes knocking on the door, opens the door, comes in. He says, hey, the admiral that is in charge of the base needs whoever was just involved in whatever went down to come brief him. And we're like, okay. Can you give us a few minutes, to clean up, whatever? And he's like, well, he just said as soon as possible. And we're like, okay, whatever. So let's tell him we're coming. So the kid leaves. We run through the shower, put on a fresh set of DCUs or whatever we were wearing, pants and shirts. And so we leave. We walk onto the main compound there off the airfield. We finally find where his little headquarters is. We walk in, and one of his staffos or secretary or somebody's like, the admiral's back here, blah, blah, blah. So they take us in this little conference room. And he's sitting at the head of the table. He's standing up, and a couple of his staff officers, junior guys are in the room with him. And he's like, gentlemen, how you doing? Come on in and have a seat. And so we go in and we sit down. And he's like, mind you, the whole way over there, we're screwed. This dude is going to flip a gasket. Who are you? How was I not aware of this? How did you involve my warship that I'm responsible for? Who cleared this? We're assuming no conversation has been had, and it hasn't. So he's like, look, you guys have had a pretty wild, rough 24 hours, huh? And we were like, yes, sir. Just waiting. And he's like, so tell me the story. How did you get there? And we're like, well, and we kind of gave him the brief. We've been doing some targeting. We've been working on this. We've been in and out of Somalia a number of times. We had an opportunity at some really important folks and to disrupt the network in a substantial way. And we just felt like it was an opportunity that we needed to take. And he's like, well, had you been planning this? And we were like, nope. It was pretty much a hasty decision that was supported by 3-letter agencies and DC in the moment because of the significance of the targets. And yeah, they asked us if we were okay doing it, and that's what we did. And again, I'm waiting for the reaction. And he goes, that's the coolest shit I've ever heard.